Hey guys, it's Cam here, welcoming you to another episode of The Build Room. Now in last week's episode, we took on the gearbox out of Violet Crumbles, we ripped it out, replaced the seals, and it's all looking good. So this time it makes sense to take on the tail shaft, which means replacing the center bearing and 3 of the uni joints, and overall just giving it a Dulux reconditioning to make it all look spick and span. So stick around and check it out. All right, so this is the tail shaft in question. It is a 2-piece tail shaft on the RA23s. I think the TA22s and maybe even the TA23 has a single piece, but basically the center bearing here attaches to the floor pan. So this is floor pan, this is the rear output shaft of the gearbox, and this is the nose of the differential. And that center bearing effectively shortens each section of the tail shaft, so it's less susceptible to vibration. And that's one of the key things here on a tail shaft, is to understand before you work on that it's a balanced unit. So if you can see, we've got balance weights here. I think there's one under here, one at the front. So like a wheel on a car or a crankshaft or anything that rotates at speed, these things are spun up and balanced to reduce that rotational vibration. The idea there is to not only reduce the MVH in the car, but also, if this is vibrating heavily, anything that it's attached to is going to wear prematurely. So yeah, they're balanced up to avoid that, and we want to make sure that when we pull it apart, the way that we put it back together, make sure that it, as much as possible, retains the original balance. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is pull all these uni joints out. There is 3 of them, one here, one behind the center bearing, one in front of the diff. And then once we've done with that, we'll pull the center bearing, and then while it's all apart, we'll give it a nice clean up. And then I was hoping to powder coat it, but I don't think that length there is going to fit into Frankie, so powder coating may be out of the question. If I can't get it in there, we'll be coating this with a ceramic high temp paint, just something that's going to hold up to the wear under the body of the car. Now to make sure this goes back exactly the way I pull it apart now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the Dremel, and I'm just going to engrave some lines on each of the joints. That way I can line them back up and bolt them up the way they came apart. So I'm not going to gouge these hugely, but I just need to make sure those etch marks are deep enough so that when I do paint over it, they still show through. All right, it's not exactly the Mona Lisa, but yeah, we've got a couple of lines here. So I put 1 on the front joint, 2 on this joint, and then 3 at the back. So it'll be easy to reassemble. So we'll get this into the vise and we'll take the front uni joint out. I'll show you that in detail, and then I'll just pull the other 2 off camera. So I've covered all of these joints first up with penetrine, just so that while we're talking, this can soak in and make the work a little bit easier. Now, this joint is designed to move on 2 axes. So you can move it vertically up and down, and you can move it left to right if you're looking at that single plane. Now, this is quite free that way, and this way is actually quite notchy and tight. So this one's probably ready for replacement. I'm glad that we're doing this. Now, if I change angles, you can see in here, basically, there is a cross piece of steel going left to right, up and down, and it has some large caps on it. This is the cap inside this circle here, and that allows for that movement. So the center section is just a solid piece, and underneath the caps, there are some needle bearings, just like we had in the steering box. So you can use a press to press these out. These are quite small uni joints, so I don't think we're going to need it. I'm just going to use a hammer and a socket, and we're going to drive this down. And what that will do is push the cap closer to the center section. And as that compresses, the uni joint will move down. We will start knocking the bottom one out under here, and then hopefully that one will pop out all the way, which will enable us then to flip it over and do the same, and then it'll come out. All this will make a lot more sense as you see it happen. So we'll get this placed in the vise a little bit differently, and then we'll hammer that first one out. All right, so if we move this out of the way, you should be able to see just at the back here, there is a circlip right in there. Now, you can just use a screwdriver and a hammer to knock that out. My screwdrivers have got a rubber end on them, so I'm going to use a small drift. And basically, we pop that one out, and then there's one on this side as well, and then those caps will move in and out. Okay, it's almost out. just there, we're just going to get the screwdriver behind it and pop it out. That's one out. It's two out. And now if you watch this cap and the cap down here, hopefully we'll start to see the bottom cap protrude from here. All I'm going to do is take an 18mm socket, set it on top, and then with a hammer, knock it in. All right, we're completely out here. We'll flip it over. What I'm going to do is just hit it with a set of vice grips and see if we can wiggle this out. Just going to move it back and forwards, and out it comes. You can see inside there's a bunch of needle bearings and a little rubber seal. These are permanently greased. Some uni joints have grease nipples on them, but yeah, these are just a sealed unit. Now we can take out the other side, and to get that out, what I'm actually going to have to do is line it back up again and then drive this through the other way. All right, so we're going to get it lined up. Just lightly tap it back to make sure we've got it seated first. All right. Just ease it out. All right, now with both caps off, this should just be able to move out completely. All right, so now we've got the yoke side. We'll get the one, oop. That's two. Okay. Managed to knock that off. All right, that just does not want to budge. It's getting ridiculous. So what I'm going to attempt to do is actually just knock it back through, and I'll be able to clean up the back of it a little bit. So with this one out, you can see if I rotate that around, there's dirtier areas and cleaner areas. I'm just going to wire brush that, knock this one through. Bit of WD-40, and hopefully that will go pretty quickly. And then what I'll do is clean up the other side as well while it's pushed back, and see if we can try this another way. Make sure that's seated properly before I try hitting it hard. Okay, see if this one comes out any easier. Wow, it's even seized a little bit itself as well. It's quite strange, it's out of the bucket now and it's seized onto the unit. There we go. I'm just going to make sure this is all clean. Lube in the yoke, lube on there. I'm going to try knocking the uni joint out now. So we've got both out. There we go. So we can take that out now. And then I can just tap this out from the back. Done. Okay, so we have our yoke here. You can still see the line in it that I engraved, so we know which way it hooks into the rest of the tail shaft. Now, that yoke guard came off while I was doing that. It's just pressed onto this race down the bottom. So I'll pop this back in, drop that over the top, take our big drift and just drop it back into position. Okay, so the only thing that I would do to this yoke now to tidy it up would just be to give it a light sand on the outside of this, not the inside race, but certainly the outside, to make sure there are no burrs or anything that are going to catch the new caps when we put them in. And then I'll give it a wire brush all over and then a coat of paint. And the other thing we want to inspect on the yoke is this surface here. So there's a little bit of surface rust here. It's nothing too bad, but this can get pretty manky. And the rear seal that we just put in the gearbox will actually ride around on this. So if this is damaged or rusty or pitted or whatever, it can ruin that rear seal. So don't go too crazy with this. The most I'm gonna do is probably rub it down with a bit of 1000 or 1500 grit sandpaper just to make sure it's all good. And then I will grease it properly before it goes back in the car. So now I'm gonna remove the other 2 uni joints and then we will regroup when we're ready to tackle that center bearing. All right, so we've got all of those uni joints out now. That was a mission. I don't know whether it's just because they've been in there for 45 years or whether my technique needs some work, but some of those end caps are really hard to get out. But they did all come out in the end, which is the main thing. And I have 3 new ones ready to go. So that means now we have to work on the center bearing. Now the center bearing, I basically remove the 4 bolts here from the back half of the tail shaft, and you expose the staked center nut. So if we have a look, the center nut here, you can see it's a nut that holds this flange on, and there is a keyway in the shaft, and the bolt is actually realistically dented with a drift into that keyway so that it can't rotate. So it's like sort of like a castle nut, but not. You don't need the pin going all the way through. Instead, you just dent that piece. So we're gonna get this in the vise now, and we'll take that apart, and then we'll see how difficult it is to get the center bearing off. I've never done one of these before, so I don't really know, but we're gonna give it a try and see. Now I'm just gonna pop a engraving mark again in line with the keyway. So basically where the keyway is running across the center of the splined shaft, I'm just gonna put a little engraving mark in there. That way when I reassemble this, I know it's going back the way it came apart. All right, might get confused now. So let's unstake this. So we've got the flange and the vise really nice and tight. I'm not gonna be able to get a drift in here just yet. I think I'll probably need a drift in the end to tap it out, but I'm gonna start with a screwdriver and see whether we can lever this out at all. Nope, maybe a smaller screwdriver. All right, let's give it a bit of movement. Don't have to bend this out far. Okay, it's not bad. And when I'm taking this off, I don't want to bend this too much because the Toyota manual does say that you're supposed to replace this nut every time you take it off. It's not a stretching nut or anything, but obviously you're going to bash this in with a drift when we put the new nut back on. So I'm going to try not to damage this because I just don't know whether I'm going to be able to get one of these at the moment. It's one of those situations where the parts store has said, take it off and bring it down and we'll see if we can get one. It's not particularly tight in its torque setting, so looks like it's going to come off. And with it the flange, so make sure you hold the drive shaft itself while you're doing this. All right, that's the nut. There's a washer in here as well. And what I'm going to do is slide it off the drive shaft first. Oh. All right, drive shaft off. All right, so you can see a couple of things here. Firstly, I'm not sure if it's supposed to be this way, but it seems like it's sagged. So this side of the bearing is a lot thinner. The rubber here is a lot thinner than it is here. So it's kind of offset. I don't know if that makes a difference. I mean, you can see quite easily when I spin it around, it's very much off axis. I mean, I feel like that can't be good. So I've sprayed a bunch of WD-40 down there, hoping that's not too tight of a fit because I can't get a drift or anything behind it, really, because of this guard that's down here. Hang on. Oh, there we go. All right, so that came off pretty easy. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be that easy, but yeah, that didn't really, I mean, there's a lot of rust in this bearing here. Maybe that's got something to do with it, but that came off very easily. I was expecting to have to fight that one. It'd be interesting to see if the new bearing's a tight fit. I'll just grab that. Tidy this up. In terms of the new one, I mean, this doesn't look too worn, but that's a tighter fit, but it's still on by hand. So that's really quite interesting. Mustn't be a press fit. Or either that, or my shaft is too worn. In reality, this is too loose, but luckily I've got a couple of tricks up my sleeve to sort this out. All right, and that is disassembly complete. This place looks like absolute garbage, so I'm gonna go through and tidy everything up, and then I will strip all the paint off those parts, give them a fresh coat, and then we will meet back here in about a day once the paint's had time to dry. All right, check this out. Those parts came up awesome. That satin black caliper paint is amazing. It's really easy to paint and it just comes up with such a nice finish on it. I'm really happy with those. Yeah, everything came out pretty good. Now it's time to try and reassemble it without damaging any of this beautiful new paint. And that's going to rely heavily on rubber jaws in the vise and a bunch of cloths. So we're going to start by getting the new center bearing in, and I'll show you that trick that I was talking about with the bearing ledge, or whatever you want to call it. Now the fitment of the bearing on that surface is almost there. There would be maybe a thou or 2 thou in it. So I don't want to go replacing this section of the drive shaft or anything like that, because then I don't know whether I'd have to get it rebalanced and all that sort of thing. Then there's a couple of things you can do. Now the first one I wouldn't recommend, but that is in case of emergency. Like if this was a trailer hub and you were stuck on the side of the road, what you can do is basically take a drift and dent all the way around here. And what that will do is, as you dent into the mounting surface, it will create a raised edge on either side. When you slide the bearing over, those raised ridges will take up the clearance. Now, that's only really on something that you're going to throw out when you're done and you just need to get home or something like that. I wouldn't recommend doing it permanently on a car. But now there are products on the market that will do a similar thing. One of those is a Loctite 609. There's different versions of this. You get a 648 and a bunch of different ones, but this is a retaining compound, and what it's designed to do is basically super glue those bearings. And this can handle anything up to a 0.1 of a millimeter gap, which is 4 thou. So I think we've got plenty in that space, and there are different versions. This is a medium strength. There are high strength versions, and there are versions that will handle higher temperatures and all that sort of thing. But on a tail shaft, this should be more than enough to get us to where we need to go. So all we need to do is make sure that this surface and the bearing surface inside are free from any particulate, give them a clean up, make sure there's no oils on them and things like that. And then we're going to coat both sides with Loctite. I'm going to spread that out. Maybe I shouldn't do that, but whatever. So we've got a nice coating there. Got a coating on the inside of the bearing. And then with these new bearings, these tabs go towards the back of the car. So get this in place. And that should be it. Now, obviously that's going to take some curing time. Meanwhile, I'll put the cap back on. Okay, and then we're going to put our flange back on, and we're going to make sure that we align our keyway and the engraved mark, if you can see it on the back there, that I put in last time. So we know this is all going back in that balanced fashion. Okay, good to go there. And we put our retaining washer on, and we can put our stake nut back in. So you do that nut up to about 180, and then you would loosen it and then redo it back up to around 69 Newton meters. So I don't think we need to do the 180 on this one. I've just done it up by hand. It should be firmly enough seated. I'll back it off now and I'll take it up to that 69. There we go. Now we need to just knock this into the keyway. All right. See there, it's well and truly knocked in there. It shouldn't vibrate loose. And now that that's all back together, we can take our uni joint housing, and I need to identify this by the two marks I gouged into it before. I think that's the right one. This one, we've got two marks there, which will align to two marks here on the housing. Now, you don't need to do this, but I am going to just put some penetrine on this surface here, just to protect it a little bit from corrosion. Same with on the other side. They were quite rusty when I got them off, so there's obviously moisture getting in there. I will just put a bit of oil on so they're good. Make sure I line up the marks. It's going back in that way. And then bolt it back together. Now, I didn't get new hardware for this because there is a shank on the bolt that's designed to fit in here. I couldn't find them. As much as I would have liked to have used the replacement bolt kit that I got. Unfortunately, that doesn't have a bolt that's big enough for these. Put that through. Two on the other side. Look, if these end up really upsetting me with the way they look, I will probably just hit them with some spray paint. All right, so with all that done, it's time to move on to the uni joints. Now, this is the same as the other uni joint, except for this one has a grease nipple on it, which means we can at least service these. These are good quality Koyo, made in Japan uni joints. And the only real consideration as we move over to ones with nipples on them is that we do want to place them such that they're easy to service. But yeah, we just need to take off the end caps. And you can see on the new end caps, just be careful when you take these out, because remember they're filled with those needle bearings. It's pre-greased, so there's some grease there to hold those bearings in across the seal. And this area is tapered. So these should be relatively easy to locate in here and then drive through. Okay, so the main thing you want to watch when you're putting these in is that the needle bearings that are in here don't end up getting dislodged, because what will happen is they'll usually fall over and sit in the bottom of the cap here. And then when you're trying to hammer this through, it won't have enough depth and you'll end up with the cap sitting outside and it won't run properly or anything like that. It'll basically just be crushed in there. So yeah, just be really careful. Also, when they're new, they have a really good seal, and ones like this that have the nipple on them obviously have airways between. So when you're pushing the caps on, it's going to want to push one of the other caps off. You can see what I mean there. So just be careful you don't fire them off across the garage. So you're gonna have to take two caps off and slide them in, and try to do so in a manner that doesn't dislodge those needle bearings. And then probably try and use the vise if I can to crush these down rather than a hammer. A, so I don't damage the paint with a miss strike, but also just to be a little more careful with the new uni joints. Okay, so I'm going to start with sliding the uni joint in without the caps. Just rest it there. Now, I think you can use anti-fretting compound and stuff like that to try and lube these in, but I'm hoping that we're not going to have too many problems. I'm going to be an optimist, and we're just going to try it as is. And we'll seat the caps in either end. Just move them around until they feel like they're going to drive in straight. Okay. Basically what I'm going to do now is pull the flexible jaws out of the vise and drop it down and just try and squeeze this from either side. And then as this obviously gets close, I'll try and get it into both caps at the same time and then squash them together. And I'll have to put some sockets on either side when I get down to the last few millimeter, so I don't end up crushing this area with the vise and scratching that paint. So yeah, this will be a tricky one, but let's see if we can do it. Vice's flat jaws are hopefully going to straighten these up a little bit, but we'll see. Okay, there's a little bit of movement there. More. A bit more. Now we're getting to the point where I can probably move this into place. Okay, now that's sitting between both. Feels pretty good. We'll keep going. I'll try and get this far enough in so that I'm comfortable that it's protecting those needles on both sides. And I think that's the limit that we're going to get to. But we've got good movement there. If you can see that left to right movement, I would feel fairly comfortable that those needle bearings are still in good shape. So I'm just going to put a socket on either side now, and we'll finish getting these in and flush. See how many hands I need to keep all this in place. All right, so we've got this one on the right here to the point where the circlip needs to go on. So I'm going to let that hang for a second. I'm going to be careful not to knock this out of the vise. There we go. So with the circlip on this side, that cap won't push any further back than it should. So now we'll just pop this on this side. There we go. And again, we're just looking to get it to the point where we can get that circlip on. So don't overdo it, but it'll get pretty close. It's going to need a bit more. All right, I think that was the last piece of movement that I needed. Yep. That looks like it'll fit over now. This one's going to be a lot tighter, so I don't think I'm going to get away with doing it by hand. There we go, almost there. Save the paintwork with a drift. All right, in place, and we are in. So we've got both the circlips back in. Both of these caps are at the depth that they should be at and no deeper. And we've got movement in that uni joint. So I'm gonna call that one a win. All right, and I've just realized what I should have done here is leave this unbolted and get the long tail shaft together first. Because basically this area here is connecting onto this, and having that full thing together while I'm trying to do the other end or anything like that is going to be a pain. So I'm going to stop working on this one. I'm going to do the rear tail shaft and then attach this back onto this piece. But I'll probably do that after I've done this front bearing as well. So I'm not going to walk you through that one by one. That'll be boring as, but maybe we'll do a time lapse. So I'll get cracking and we'll regroup when we're done. right, so we are done. For those of you that were watching keenly during that montage, I did actually have that issue where one of the needle bearings came out of one of the uni joints. I couldn't get it to compress as much as it needed to. I was really lucky. I was being quite gentle with the vise, and when I noticed that it wasn't moving, I was able to go back, open it back up, reseat that needle bearing, and then reassemble it, and it all looks good. I also got some steel wool and some WD-40, and I cleaned the shaft of the gearbox yoke. So now that should be nice and smooth for the new seal in the back of the gearbox. But other than that, this thing came out amazing. I'm so impressed with it. It looks basically brand new, and all I have to do now is make sure that I don't damage this before I have a chance to get it back under the car. So I'm gonna have to find a safe place for it around the shop. But that is where I'm gonna call it for today. Very productive episode, very little frustration, lots of wins. So do me a favor, like and subscribe below. That's really gonna help out the channel. And if you are new to the series, you should watch the full Violet Crumbles series, which I'll link to here. And we've also got some episodes for the A90 here. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the Build Room. Bye for now.